Hi Tom.
Hi.
I'm calling you to talk about the amazing new CGI Burberry campaign that you've worked on that came out a couple of weeks ago. I want to dive straight into talking about the process of creating something like this. What was the brief and where do you kind of begin?
Mainly just getting a phone call from Nick, really. It was just saying, is this possible? We obviously can't go and shoot Kendall. She can't go anywhere. No one else can. So can we do her in CGI? So the first question was, can we do it? And usually, if I get a phone call from Nick that says, can we do this thing? Your brain kind of straight away says, no, you can't do it. But you sort of find a way to do it. And he kind of filled me in a little bit. I was kind of sending him some references of, the kind of style that we can achieve and the level of realism and that sort of thing. So then once we kind of agreed that it can happen and should happen, then we kind of got going on it. And I got sent the references that they've been working on with, that Nick had been working on with Peter and Andy Tomlinson, the set designer, and Riccardo and Katy, the stylist. And then we just sort of dived straight in, really. The first hurdle was, how do we get a CGI likeness of Kendall? The amazing team a company called Mimic Productions, who are based in Berlin, who I've worked with before, and they kind of specialise in digital humans. Very early on, we realised that we probably need to get a lot of references from Kendall. So we asked her, I did a few kind of tests on some iPhone 3D scanning apps, sort of figured out what the best one would be to ask her to use that, which she did. And then she sent us a very good kind of, sort of low resolution-ish 3D model of her head that was made from this iPhone app. And then along with a bunch of references that had sort of few prerequisites that we asked for, sort of soft lighting and in certain positions and that sort of thing. And they kind of started to make Kendall from scratch, really, using her iPhone 3D scan as a reference, but pretty much from scratch. And I worked closely with them, going backwards and forwards and, getting really into the detail of how her face is, how it's built, where her cheekbones are, what her lips do, really down to the kind of finer detail, going backwards and forwards a little bit on that, using the references that she sent us, but also kind of trawling the internet.
Can you tell me a bit about how you took the real-life Burberry Thomas Monogram collection into this digital format?
So we received the kind of digital files from Burberry, and we had to kind of remake them a little bit because they were sort of super high res, very, very high detailed. And when we're producing what we made, we needed them to be a little bit kind of lower resolution. So yeah, we did a bit of remaking of that, and then we kind of used those as a sort of base, the stuff that we received from Burberry, and then started simulating them, which basically means, we put Kendall into a position that we want her in, and then we put the clothes on her and then simulate it so the fabric behaves as the fabric would in real life. So that was that process. I worked with a company called FBFX, who are based here in London with that.
You were talking about kind of working with everyone on different aspects of Peter and Katy and stuff, and I was wondering about that kind of narrative of Kendall moving through the space and the lighting and direction and how that process works, especially, I know you guys did a lot of it over Zoom.
We started with the stills, so they sort of had their own narrative based on Katy's styling, because it was the kind of individual characters. One of the most interesting things I think about this process for this particular job was that we used a game engine. And if you're thinking about CGI stuff, if you think about more traditional kind of CGI, what generally happens is that you spend ages and ages and ages making your scene, and then, if you want to light it, you have to, put lights in, then you hit render, and then it can be, anything from, a minute up to, a couple of hours before you actually see a frame even. But with computer games, they're designed to run at, 60 to 90 frames per second. So it's rendering that amount of frames every second. So you see it in real time. It's called real-time rendering. That technology has moved on so much in the last few years. It's made doing this sort of thing a much more sort of tactile and kind of creative process, I think, because we can see, if we're trying stuff out, especially lighting and things like that, we can just grab a light, move it, and it's like we're moving a light in the real world. And we instantly see how it's affecting, everything in the scene. Mainly you're seeing stuff as it happens, which is great, especially when you're collaborating with a number of people, and especially when you're doing it over Zoom as well. It just means that we can have a very sort of open and fluid conversation about what needs to happen. Coupled with that, we did another really interesting thing, which was getting the poses for Kendall and then eventually some of the animation. So we ended up doing some motion capture. So I got a friend of mine, we did it all in a very kind of socially distanced way. And then we got this motion capture equipment that I had here, luckily. And my friend wore it, and she has a similar-ish body type to Kendall. And then we were streaming the data from the motion capture suit that she was wearing directly onto the CGI version of Kendall in the set that we'd made. And again, it was all kind of happening in real time, and we could move the camera around and we can move the lights around. So it's a very, very intuitive way of working, especially for, you know, somebody like Nick, who's, you know, been making films and photographing, you know, in a traditional sense for many, many years. It was sort of very, very easy for him and Peter and Katy to kind of understand what was going on and what their capabilities were. So it was very much like a sort of, you know, real life shoot in a way. So I was streaming from my webcam, and they could see Elisa, who's the model wearing the motion capture suit. So they could direct her, but then on the other half of the screen, they saw the digital version of Kendall in the set with the lighting that we're playing with, and we're moving the camera around. So it was really, really fun and quite exciting to do.
I also wanted to talk to you about the actual set. I feel like it's quite a dystopian video game kind of feeling, which I love, but I just would love to hear from you how you created it and what the kind of thoughts behind it were. It kind of started a conversation that I wasn't part of, between Riccardo and Nick and Peter and Andy, the set designer. So by the time I'd kind of got onto the project, these references had kind of already been landed on. And at the same time, we were kind of rebuilding the set that Andy Tomlinson designed. So just sort of remaking that in CGI as well. He kind of sent me a Google SketchUp version that he'd created, and then we had to sort of remake that. And then I kind of remade that and broke it apart into a sort of modular kind of set. So, you know, the floors and the walls could all move. There's plinths in there, there's different, you know, bits of, you know, swimming pool furniture, ladders and diving board was in there at some point. And because we made it all modular, we could, again, sharing screen with everyone, and everyone was kind of part of the process, just move things around, which again was really, really useful. You know, I can kind of pick up, you know, what would in real life be a 100-meter long wall and just move it over here, and, you know, block out light and do different things with shadows, which was great. Tiled aspects to it as well, which was kind of sort of lent it, I think accidentally sort of lent itself really well to this sort of CGI computer environment that we were in. And then when we were working with Peter, you know, he was sort of pushing for us to kind of not really hide what it is that we're doing. You know, don't try and pretend that this is a real environment. You know, so at some points, and we had some shots that didn't make it into the final film of, you know, when you zoom out of this thing, you just have this weird abstract floating sort of platform thing that's just in the middle of this, you know, sun-drenched kind of cloudy sky. That's the fun thing about this, is that when these sort of game engines, it's essentially a very, very, very complicated computer game. So, you know, they're very, very fun to work in because it's so, you know, as I was saying before, it's very tactile, and once you've kind of got all the components, which is the hard bit, once you've got them, it's really, really fun to just sort of move them around and put this over there and try that over there. And you just end up, you know, seeing stuff that you wouldn't have thought of if you had to kind of sit down and draw it out. The fact that you can do this all so quickly kind of opens up this whole other world of possibilities, which is, you know, really great. Thank you so much for talking to me and kind of demystifying CGI a bit.
Trying to.
Thank you so much.
All right, cheers. Bye. Bye.